Hello my friends, and a very warm welcome back to my painting channel. And in this video, we're going to be painting something a little bit special. We're going to paint the big miniature from the Resident Evil 2 board game. So this is the biggest miniature in the box, and this is a mutation of William Birkin. So when we painted the Birkin family a little while back, this is one of the main mutations of William Birkin. So as he starts to allow the G virus to take over his body, he slowly mutates into this insane monstrosity that you see in front of you here. So we're going to have real fun building up these reds and turning this into a real beast on camera as well. So we're really going to bring this one to life. So we're going to start using a Vallejo black red, and we're just going to cover all of the skin with this one. So like I normally say, when you've got an area of a model where it's going to take up a lot of the area of the model, so like the skin in this one in particular, because this skin is going to be red and it covers over most of the model, we're going to spend a lot of time, or we're going to spend a lot more time than normal, trying to get this to really boost, really stand out, and really look the part. So we're just going to cover all of the miniature using this, all bar just sort of the area in the chest and the big nails as well. Now once that is dry, we're going to use the orange brown from Vallejo, and we're just going to use this as a base for the eyeballs. There is an eyeball on his shoulder, and there's also a very small one on his left leg as well. This is all part of, as far as I can gather, the mutation process that happens with Birkin throughout the video game. So this guy he's got kind of an insane little story through the video game, and the models from Steam-forged games from the Resident Evil 2 board game actually do really look exactly like the video games. Like I say all the time, the nostalgia level that I get from painting these is fantastic, but there are also so many different models in the box that they challenge you in so many different ways as well. So once that orange brown is dry, we're going to go to one of my go-to colors, which is bone white. This is one of my favorite colors on the channel. This is a great color because this isn't quite white and it's not too sort of dark either. This is a really good in-between sort of color. So this is a great sort of creamy sort of texture, creamy sort of color. And this is fantastic for doing things like nails, claws, teeth, bones, all of these sorts of things. So we're going to use this just across all of the claws and across all of those sort of teeth and things that are protruding from his chest here. And we're going to cover all of the claws just down the sides as well. Now I tried my best with this one to get rid of quite a few of the mold lines. Unfortunately, some of them were a little bit stubborn and a little bit persistent, and I did struggle to get rid of all of them. It doesn't matter too much though, because we are going to paint over all of these different bits, so we're going to kind of blend them in a little bit. So it's not the end of the world. It's not something that we need to worry too much about, but just be warned, they can be a little bit tough. Once the bone white is dry, I'm going to use an ash grey from AK Interactive. Now, if you don't have the AK Interactive range, or you don't have the ash grey, you could always use, actually Dawnstone from Citadel would be a really good alternative to this. And we're just going to paint across the very top part of the head here, so just around the eyes area, just across the head, a little bit around the face and sort of top part of the jawline, just like so. But also just going to add a little bit of dabbing, just a little bit down the neck as well, because the original color with this character is that he is sort of mutated into this red sort of color, but he almost has this sort of like almost kind of shark feeling, or this kind of sort of shark look to his head as well, where it goes into like this gray sort of color. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to paint this using this really sort of dark gray to begin with. And then once we've done that bit, we're going to move on to use violet red. And violet red is exactly as it says. This is a sort of purpley red colour. So this colour will tie in a few of these veins. So we're going to paint all of these veins and all of these sort of gnarly sort of big protruding veins around the legs and the hands and things like that. And being a sort of reddy tone, a sort of red kind of colour as well, this is going to tie these into the miniature, but it's also going to make them stand out slightly as well. This is going to allow us to have something a little bit different to just all of that red on the model to look at. And again, it's just going to pull your eyes around the model in a few different ways and just give you a little bit of a different feel to the miniature as well. Now once everything is dry, I'm then going to give him a quick once over with Strong Tone. So Strong Tone is a nice sort of dark brown sort of colour from the Army Painter. This is a fantastic wash colour. It sits in the recesses really nicely, and it sort of has this kind of magical property where you can just sort of place this onto the miniature, and it really sort of brings out a lot of that tone, that texture, a lot of that sort of detail as well. As you can see that I'm just picking out here on the eye, just by applying applying the wash into the eye area, you can see where it's really starting to sit in those areas where it picks out a lot of the veins and the details and all of these sorts of things. I know all washes will do this sort of thing, and it's up to you to use your favourite one, but with this I'm just using a nice sort of dark brown sort of colour, tying those colours that we've used together, and then we'll build them up from there. What you could use as an alternative, if you wanted to, instead of using a dark brown sort of wash, another alternative, and a good alternative, would be purple, because there is a lot of colour and a lot of purple tones with this particular mutation of William Birkin through the games, and that would tie those colours together in a really nice fashion as well. Now, once all of the wash is completely dry, instead of dry brushing, which you can do if you want, but by dry brushing we would lose a lot of the detail, and we don't want to lose any of the detail. We want to pick out and build up on the detail. So we're going to be brave. It's going to take us a little bit of time, but we are going to get there, and it's going to make all of the difference. We're actually going to hand paint all of those different bumps and bulbs and all of those different bits to the skin, as you can see, where I'm just going to start to pick out all of those details individually by hand. Like I say, it'll take a little bit of time, but it is very much worth it. Instead of dry brushing it, we're going to really sort of blend these reds together and boost the vibrance. Now, for this first layer I'm using burnt red, so this is going to be the first sort of step up from that original base colour, because our wash has sort of darkened it down a little, giving us the perfect opportunity to build that contrast up. Now, this burnt red does have this really great sort of red, sort of wine kind of texture. It has this really, really lovely sort of deep red colour, and then we're going to be able to build up from there using heavy red. Now, what I'm doing is I'm just making sure that I'm adding a little bit of water to the paint. So like I've said to you in the past, or like I have said in the past, the way to sort of add water to your paint is to add a couple of drops of water to your paint, just to make sure that you get enough sort of manipulation and movement in your paint so that the paint has the same kind of texture as milk. You don't want it to be too watery and too thin where it doesn't take to the model, but you also don't want the paint to be too thick and just stagnate and pool in certain areas. So by adding a little bit of water and getting this paint to manipulate a little bit better, you can really see how much of an effect it has when you start to really pick out those details. You can see how the paint then moves and flows just off the brush in a nice even fashion, giving us this really lovely easy sort of texture and tone, and this really lovely way of building the colours and the highlights. So this heavy red, as you can see, I'm just using the very tip of the brush. Now, for all of this, picking out all of these details, I'm using the same brush across the entirety of the model, and I'm just using my nice size 0 brush, and I'm just using as much of the edge of the brush as I can, just to pick out as much of the detail as I can. And this now is all about picking where you want the light to be and where you want the highlights to highlight, and where you want these sort of red tones and red colours to really sort of boost and pop and make the miniature really stand out. So as you can see, I'm just painting just around all of those ribs and all those areas together. Now, once that's done, we're going to use half and half. So we're going to use the red that we've used previously, so just using that heavy red, and we're also going to mix in half of a bloody red into this as well. Bloody red, as you know, is one of my favorites as well, because not only does it have a great name, it also has this really lovely sort of vibrant red boost to it. As you can see just by me dabbing a little bit on here, you can see where this is really starting to create this vibrant red tone already. Now, don't forget, my friends, when you do paint your models, the paint does look a little brighter when it is wet, and it does dry down a little bit darker. So don't be too worried if it looks a little bit too much at first, because it will dry down a bit. But what I would say is always less is more. So build up in layers and build up in stages. Don't go too crazy and gun-ho with it. Try to be a little bit more conservative, take your time and build those layers. Like I said, I know it's going to take a while because we're hand painting all of these bits, but it is so going to be worth it in the end, because the skin tones are going to look fantastic. I promise. So as you can see, I'm just trying to build on where I think the light is going to be, and you can really see that contrast now coming through on those legs, just across the sort of stomach area, and you can see just how much of an effect this is having. Now, although I'm only showing you this on the legs and the stomach and things like that, you can do this across the whole of the miniature, so across all of the arms, the feet, everything like that. Now, once that is done, then we're just going to use the bloody red on its own, and we're just going to use this one just as the extreme highlight. So you don't need to be quite as extreme with this one, and you can just pick out those areas that you really want the highlight in to start to pop. So as you can see, I'm trying to paint areas that I've already painted, but just being a little bit more careful about where I place this. So again, using the very tip of the brush, and now I'm just picking out where I want the light to just be catching on all of those different areas of the miniature, just like so. And we're trying to do this nice and gently, nice and slowly. There's no rush, there's no need to overdo it and rush it and make mistakes. You know, take your time, really enjoy the painting process. Like I said, I know this is a big model, and I know there's a lot of painting going through here, especially when we're hand painting this rather than dry brushing it. But as I said, it's going to be so worth it in the end. You'll see just how these reds really do stand out and create this amazing character as we go. So there we go, as you can see, just picking out all of those areas, just bit by bit by bit. Like I normally do, I always enjoy to show you a little bit of a longer sort of process of me painting, just so that you can kind of get a feel for the brush strokes and how that paint is taken to the miniature and how it will slowly dry onto the miniature while we're painting as well. It's always good fun to kind of show you what we're doing rather than just explain it and expect you to kind of just know. It's always good to have an idea as to how it takes to the model and how the painting process works. Once all of the red is dry, I'm then going to use heavy violet. I'm using this heavy violet, and again with our size 0 brush, just going to use the very tip of the brush just to start to pick out some of the raised edges on these veins. And as you can see, this now is going to allow the veins to really stand off that red. And as I said earlier, this is going to give us something else to look at. So it's not just an entirely red miniature. This is going to give us a few little patches here and there, and a few little areas here and there where we can really sort of take our eye and take a look around the model and realize that there's a lot more detail and a lot more character to this model than just a big mutated red sort of mountain of a creature. So there is these little bits here as well, just to kind of add that extra character, just like so. So just take your time and sketch these little colours just on top. Again, nice thin down paint so that this is going to dry into the miniature and dry into the colours in a nice fashion as well. And just have a look around where these little veins are. There's a few on the body, there's a few across the legs, there's also some just across the backs of the hands and things like that as well. And it depends on sort of how many of these you want to try to pick out. Some of them can be quite small and difficult to reach. You could just add maybe 1 or 2 just to kind of draw your eye away, as I say. Once that's done, then I'm going to use deep purple from the AK Interactive, and this is just a subtle highlight. So this is just the next step up. This is a really great little highlight to move up from. Again, if you don't have this paint and you're not an AK Interactive user, the Army Painter do a really good sort of alien purple. That would be my go-to if I wasn't using the AK. So that's a good alternative paint there as well for a nice highlight for you as well. And that's all we're doing, is just gently picking out some of these bits. You don't have to cover the whole thing because we've done the whole thing with the darker purple. We're just now starting to pick the raised points just to get a little bit of a highlight to it. So once the purple parts are done, we're going to go back to that ash grey, and now we're going to pick those colours and those details back out so you can see where that dark wash has sat just in between, around the eyes and all around the head here, and you can see where it's done all of the work for us. So that's all we've got to do now, using the tip of that brush again, same brush, size 0 as I said. We're just going to pick out all of those detailed points and pick out where we want the highlights to be. So just going to paint across the top of the head, which is always difficult to catch on camera, and just around the neck area as well. Once that's done, I'm then going to move on to a graphite. So this is a slightly lighter highlight tone, and then we're just going to pick these out as well. So as I was saying, don't forget you could always use alternative paints. You don't always have to use the exact same paints that I do. This is just giving you guys sort of an idea as to what paints I use and how I've created sort of the paint scheme and got the sort of colours that I'm using in the videos as well. So from there you can see I'm just using now instead a little bit more of a stippling motion, just to create a little bit of character and texture and depth across the face and across the head area, just to kind of make it look a little bit more stone-like, or a little bit sort of more worn and a little bit more sort of garish, rather than flat colours and flat brush strokes and things like that. It's just giving a little bit more to that character. Once that's done, then I'm going to use a silver grey, and this is just a really interesting colour, the silver grey. This is purely an optional layer. You could always just use a nice sort of white colour or a white tone if you wanted to. This silver grey is a special sort of colour that I picked up in a box of non-metallic metal paints from the AK Interactive, and it has a really great property, or a really great ability, to sort of boost the highlights of greys and keep them looking a little bit grey as well, so they don't end up going to be too white or anything like that. This is a really great sort of colour to use for this sort of thing. Once that bit is done and we've done all of the face, we're then going to go back onto doing all of these bones. So we're going back to the bone white, and again, instead of dry brushing anything, we're going to start to pick out all of those bones and details by hand. So we're just going to paint now, again using that very tip of the size 0 brush, and we're just going to start by picking out all of these bones on the chest. And you can see now, just by using those sketching motions that I talk about quite often, so I always talk about these little sketching motions and things like that. If you just sit down at home and practice a little bit of sketching and practice a little bit with a pencil, or even a normal sort of biro pen, you can kind of get used to sort of how heavy or how light you need to sketch with sort of a pen onto a sheet of paper, and that'll give you sort of a bit of practice and a bit of use of how to sketch and how to paint in this sort of fashion, because that's all we're doing is just sketching our paintbrush across the miniature. Now I'm also going to put this just across the claws as well. As you can see, the wash is sort of sat in the claws in kind of an odd way, so we're just going to start to build the details back up, and we're just going to paint this one on. With this being nice and thin, this is going to leave, as you can see, it's going to bring through a little bit of that colour and texture and darkness from underneath as well. And this is where I was saying before about using multiple layers, because when you place the first layer of thin paint like so, that will leave a little bit of the darkness underneath, and that will give you something then that you can build highlights from. Now from there, once the bone white is dry, we're going to use Elfic Flesh, and this is a perfect creamy sort of highlight colour to the bone white. This gives you a really nice easy sort of highlight that is the perfect step up. As you can see, it has this really nice contrast boost, but it's also still keeping to a creamy sort of texture as well. And the only thing that I found when painting this model this way was by painting the bones and everything in this sort of style, the bones do look very white at first before you apply some of the textures and technical paints later. So again, there's different ways that you can paint this depending on the original box art or the original sort of concept art, and you could go with a darker colour and paint the claws more of a grey tone and a dark grey colour, and that would also work, because there are different versions or different types of artwork of this particular model that look like that as well. Now, as you can see, using this Elfic Flesh, what I'm doing now is just using the very tip of the brush, and I'm starting to build some of these lines, as you can see. So again, we leave in some of the texture and some of the tone from underneath, and now we're just sketching these lines in, which is creating this texture of sort of like the ribbed kind of effect that you kind of get on bones or long claws or like a tusk or anything like that. So we're just building that illusion of texture just by creating these little lines with our brush strokes. And then we're going to move on and use off-white. Now I'm using off-white. You don't have to use off-white. You could use things like the dead white from Vallejo and things like that. They will work in a very similar sort of fashion. I'm just using the off-white for this one because this is a really nice, vibrant, boosting sort of white colour. And this is going to give us our perfect final highlight to these bones and these sort of claws and things like that. And it's going to give us the opportunity, especially on the claws where you can see all of these lines, to really drum home this sort of light texture where we build in this like I say, this texture of bone and this sort of light and dark contrast between the areas where the shade is dried and then the areas where we're highlighting, just like so. And you can really see that texture now starting to show through in a really nice fashion. This is really nice. It's so simple yet so effective. It looks great, and it is very quick and easy to do. And then once that is complete, then we're going to move back onto the orange brown, and we're going to pay a little bit more attention back onto the eye. So mixing this with a little bit of water, you can see just how nice and quick and easily this is to manipulate. And we're going to use the very tip of the brush just to paint the orange back in, while avoiding painting on all of these little veiny areas, trying to build up that vibrance and that intensity of this orange. Now we are going to build this up in a few different layers with a few different colours, and we're going to get a really nice, intense looking gaze out of this eye. So we're just going to go back with the original colour that we used, like I say, with this orange brown, and we're just going to paint that in first. Once that bit is dry, we're going to use the orange, brown and bright orange together in equal parts. So as I like to do, this is half of one and half of the other, so 50% of each, making it nice and simple. This is a great half stop, which will allow you to build that vibrancy then. And we're just going to paint this then more closely towards the iris, or to the middle part of this eye. And as you can see, we're already starting to get this much more intense, much brighter, much more vibrant sort of tone and colour straight through the eye in this way. And we're going to do this, like I say, with a couple of different layers and a couple of different colours, because we're really going to build this tone up. So then we're going to use the bright orange on its own, and again mixing in a nice little bit of water so this manipulates onto the miniature in a nice, easy, quick and sort of simple fashion, just like so. We're going to use the stippling sort of technique, and we're just going to paint this again closer to the iris, not so far around the eye. We're just going to dot this around in little patches, just like so. We're just using the very tip of the brush as always, and just trying to be as careful as possible not to get this onto those veins and those areas just around the middle of the eye as well. And you can really see the sort of intensity of this eye starting to come through and starting to show through, and it's really going to give this a really good sort of piercing gaze, a really good level of character, and a really, really nice sort of intense orange colour as well, which is going to stand off that red. Now from there I'm using a pastel peach from AK Interactive. If you don't have this colour, you could use the orange that we used previously and mix in a little bit of cream or white to get that intensity. But these pastel tones from the AK Interactive are fantastic because they are very, very bright. So yeah, we just again using the very, very edge, very, very tip of the brush, as you can see, and using that stippling motion just to kind of create this illusion of sort of texture and tone around the sort of closer to the middle area of the eye. Now once we've done with the eye itself, we're then going to use a rosy flesh. This is just going to cover all of those little veins. So this is creating a little bit of a pink tone, again tying that orange and the red colours together around the eye, and again just creating this really intense, this really sort of extreme piercing gaze out of this eye, and creating this sort of monstrous look that the eye is giving us. We're spending a little bit of time on this eye, and again it's going to be very, very much worth it, because it's really going to make this stand off the model, and it's really going to be a focus point on the model. When so much is red and so much of the model is this red sort of colour, we're then going to have this really amazing piercing looking eye as well. So then we're going to move on and use deep yellow. For this one I'm going to turn this into a glaze. That means we're using so much water, we're mixing a lot of water into this one, that it just becomes a very thin sort of layer paint. So as you can see, just showing you on my hand how thin this needs to be. And that's all I'm doing, is using this as a glaze. So I'm just painting this yellow across the areas where we painted all of the orange, and that's just to boost a little bit of the vibrancy and to get that to look a little bit more sort of intense and a little bit more light and yellow. Then I'm just going to use a tenebrous grey just across the iris, just across the very, very centre. Again, you could use black for this, that's absolutely fine. And again, the reason for this is just so that it gives us that contrast between this really extreme sort of shadow and dark centre, while we've got this really bright yellow and orange sort of eyeball really piercing at us. I'm then going to take a small amount of red tone, so a little bit of red wash, again mixing this with water so that it becomes like a glaze like we've just done with the yellow, and this time I'm just going to paint this just up over those sort of veins and just around the outer edge of the eye, so that again that just sort of darkens down the outside, so that creates this really cool contrast of light and dark. Once all of that is done, I'm then going to use a nice matte varnish. For this I use a Vallejo premium airbrush matte varnish, and I use this on every miniature that I paint. So when I paint a miniature and then I sort of video them and show you guys how they look, they've always been finished off with a matte varnish. A matte varnish is fantastic. It ties the colours together, it mattes down and dulls down any of the shine of some of the paints that you've used, but it also protects the models as well for going inside and outside of boxes. And again, if you play the games and you're using your hands to move the miniatures, 1 or 2 coats of matte varnish is a great thing to do, because it will protect your model. And then for the final stage, I'm going to use a small amount of Blood for the Blood God, which is the Citadel Technical paint. And the reason why I'm putting this on after the matte varnish is because the matte varnish does exactly what it says. It mattes and dulls everything down. Now this colour is supposed to be a very, very shiny sort of technical colour, because it's supposed to create this illusion of wet blood. That's not going to work if you use a matte varnish on top, because it will dull down that tone. So instead of using the matte varnish last, we're going to use this last, so this goes over the top of that matte varnish, creating the nice sort of wet blood sort of effect that we want. Now with these sorts of technical paints, what I will always say to you is less is more. So don't go so extreme. You don't have to cover the entirety of the model with this sort of thing, but what I will be doing is just using, as you can see, a very broken open brush, and just using that stippling, that dabbing effect, that motion, just to create the illusion that there's a bit of spatter, a bit of blood, a little bit of texture and color onto the model. And this is creating a lot more character, bringing it to look a little bit more like the video game version, because he's really gnarly and bloody and sort of broken and all of these sorts of things. But it's also going to tie some of those colors together, so it's going to tie these white claws that we've made straight into the reds and things that we've made as well. So it's going to create this really cool, extreme, like I say, gnarly effect. And all in all, that is my William Birkin G3 version, so that's one of his mutations all done. It's been a really, really fun model to paint. I've absolutely loved painting this one. It's a bit of a beast. It's taken a little bit of time, but as I said, it's worth it, because by the time we get there, look at how amazing this looks, and it's going to be fantastic to use this in my board game. As always, I'd like to just take the time to say thank you to you all of my newer subscribers for tuning in, subscribing. Thank you to everyone for watching. Thank you for all your positivity, your comments. I love hearing from you. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of this one. It's great. So yeah, I really, really do love it. It's amazing being able to communicate with such a fantastic community of people, and everything you've brought to this channel, each and every single one of you, for the comments, the views, the likes, everything is amazing. Please consider liking the video if you've enjoyed the content. It really means a lot to me, and it helps to boost my channel as well. So thank you to you all for everything that you do, and I really do hope to see you guys on the next video, which I'll keep as a surprise, and hopefully you'll enjoy that one too. Please, as always, take care of yourselves, my friends, and I will see you all soon.